Hey folks, Steve here with another Korea Fire and Ice video. This video is being recorded almost, I think it's close to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, something like that, since I last uploaded a video in this series. That absence is the usual excuse of life being busy, really busier than I could have projected. There was there's no planning for it. It just got really hectic, and you would just get to the end of the day and basically be in a state where like you could not bring, I couldn't bring myself to expend any more energy for even fun and this kind of stuff, right? Because this is, it's still a lot of mind power spent thinking through this game and playing through it and all that stuff. So it just became, I was just too exhausted to put myself on camera and to play through. So I had to kind of put myself on break for that, just because everything else was keeping me busy. But I had gotten my uh, Korean War game shipment in from Compass Games the other day, and that was kind of a nice little kickstart to say, hey, let's try to get back to it. We still got more to play, still more to see and do, um, and try to work our way out of it. Now, um, because this is the first video in a while, I'm probably going to do a long intro here, so bear with me. My mind has had some time to kind of gel on the game so far. And what's really interesting is that now that the Korean War uh, designer signature series reprint has arrived, it definitely puts this game in an interesting light, right? I didn't really want to talk about it in my unboxing video for the Korean War. Um, but I think there's a lot to compare between this game and that game, and it's almost just unavoidable. Like I can't think about this game now without thinking about that other game and comparing them. And maybe at some point, it might be worthwhile to do a real comparison video. Because I'm going to get through this game, I'm going to do a review at some point, and I don't know how soon because I don't want to do a Korea game back to back with another Korea game. That would be kind of tough on my mind. I think I want to switch it up, maybe play the Deadly Woods or something next. But I do want to do some stuff on the Korean War reprint that has come out. And at the end of that, and being able to or attempting to objectively review each game, I think after that, individually review this game, Korea Fire and Ice, review the Korean War reprint edition. Maybe there is, some utility in doing a video very specific to comparing the two games to one another. And I think the comparison is much more valid than, say, this game compared to OCS Korea. Really, with OCS Korea, you're really dealing with a totally different kind of monster. No pun intended there. Where, the complete campaign game of OCS Korea is going to take you dozens and dozens of hours likely to complete. Whereas, we look at this game, we're probably somewhere north of 20 hours and of actual play, not me yammering on as I do. And supposedly the Korean War reprint, based on the original game, the campaign is going to be somewhere up, north of 200, not 200, 20 hours, north of 20 hours. So really, between the 2 or 3 games here, I think it makes much more sense to compare Fire and Ice with the Korean War from the 80s and the reprint edition that just has come out. And it's tough even now because I've read through the rules for the reprint. I had read some of the rules for the original edition of that game. With the reprint, I obviously have my copy and the new PDF to read. And even just reading through the rules, it's interesting. I can see, and I don't know this for sure. Maybe I would need to ask Adam, the designer of Korea Fire and Ice, about this. Did he look at that older Korean War game as a source of inspiration for some of the mechanics? And that's not to say that they're similar. The games are very different, but you can still see an intent to say, hey, there's a certain historical thing here that you want to represent mechanically. What's a way to do that? And there are some commonalities. There are a lot of differences between the two game designs. Um, Obviously, I think the big change up here is that you just have a very different armor and artillery support model compared to that game, which handles those things differently, um, and that those in the Korean War game are treated as specific asset counters that need to be joined up with other combat units, but are a little bit closer to where you would have specific tank armor units on the map. And each game, tries to handle victory differently, and I think there's a lot to compare there. And because this video is several, this is turn 20, right? We're going to do turn 20 in this video, or in maybe more. Anyone who's watching this, I don't feel too bad talking about the Korean War here, right? You've been along for the ride. Obviously, there's so much to discuss for that game, totally and wholly separately, and not to detract from anything I'm covering in this game. But I think if you were to compare the two games, what's funny is that they're from the same publisher, so it's not like I'm, scandalous talking about, two different Korean War games back to back or something. But like I'm cheating on one with the other. Just that, it does force a question, right? You have this well-regarded older game that's being republished that is already well regarded. You have this newer game that has not been, I think, just in the general sphere of the gaming community, not necessarily well regarded. And it kind of makes it, it just calls into question, right? Like, what Korean War game do you want to get? I think that's a fair comparison to try to walk through and understand, like, well, what are the pros and cons of each? And looking at the rules, just to kind of speak to like this game, and putting this in a context, like the whole concept of movement and activities and how far units can move, each of the games are going to get to a similar place, but they get there differently. And what's funny is I can look at the combat system of this game, right, where we're pulling our attack type chits, and then we have to do some calculation, and we got to figure out some numbers before an attack can even take place. And you say that kind of takes a little while, right? You got to calculate those different the different equations, and there's some interplay, and you kind of figure things out. And it takes a little bit to process an actual attack, and you might have several attacks across a whole turn. What's funny is I might have thought, okay, with the Korean War, that whole combat process would be much more streamlined, right? It would be like, OCS, go do your combat ratio, roll some dice, get some modifiers, and you're done. Even in the Korean War, it is involved. It is actually involved. Um, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's not a dissimilar amount of calculation that you have to do. So I'll just, for those who are watching this video, if you've not played the Korean War, I can tell you just straight up, there is it has its own script to kind of go through to adjudicate combat. So if you were looking at this stuff and saying, "Oh man, what a process to execute an attack," I guess by comparison, the other game isn't that different. And in fact, you're probably doing more die rolling in the Korean War system, because you have to adjudicate armor support. So there's a whole die roll to determine what your die roll modifier will be for your actual combat die roll, and stuff like that, which I don't see as a bad thing, mind you. There is a certain amount of complexity in process to execute in either game system, which is interesting. So it will be interesting as I get through the rest of this game and see where we end up. I can tell you right now, for sure, I like the aesthetics of this game more than the Korean War. The counters in the Korean War are fine. The map I do not like as much as I like this map. I actually really like this map for this game. It strikes a nice balance between showing difference in terrain, but also being aesthetically pleasing and easy to look at for the most part. Sometimes if you're looking at the different hills, it's a different shade of brown, and you need to double check which one you're actually looking at. But there's a lot of clarity. Everything pops. The player aid charts all pop really nice. The counters pop. I don't know why pop is meaningful here, but it all looks very nice and is aesthetically pleasing. Where I think the Korean War is not as aesthetically pleasing. So I don't know. There's just weird things that if I eventually get to a comparison video, we'll dive much deeper on those topics. So it puts the rest of this game in a certain light, I guess, right? Because before we were playing this game purely in its vacuum. Now that I do have a copy of the Korean War, and I really had wanted one for a while, back before it was being reprinted. It was just some old, well-known game, and I just could, I didn't want to spend the money to get, a pre-owned copy of an out-of-print game. This was sort of like, well, hey, I can't get the Korean War, but I can get a game on the Korean War, and my buddy gave me his copy, and this is what we're playing, right? But now that that other game is available to me, right, it's like, okay, I can't help but think and want to think through, well, how does that game do this differently? Um, Knowing, for instance, like we've talked so much in this video series about the victory point system and how the victory point system maybe needs some tweaks, might be a little counterintuitive. You need to kind of figure out how to make it work for you. And once you get to a certain point, the VP system kind of balances out and it makes sense once the war kind of gets to a front line based mode of operation. Um, by comparison, the Korean War victory point system, or I guess victory method, um, is a lot more in line with I think what folks would think about in terms of territory and held territory over time. And when you think about the carrots and sticks within a system as to why are you taking certain actions and where are you really going with them, and like why would you do this, or does the game incentivize you to do something that kind of doesn't make sense? I suspect while I have my concerns with this game in terms of how those objective markers are able to be placed, you really don't have that problem in the Korean War. The Korean War system is really based around, the UN player holding on to as much territory as possible over time, scoring victory points, and hoping to have enough to reach certain thresholds. And so the game incentivizes you to take territory, to retain territory, not to give it up if you can help it. And I think that just is in line with most wargamer expectations of like, well, what am I even trying to do here? And there are other mechanics that influence the players in terms of the tension of the war and foreign intervention and the pros and cons and the brinkmanship that is involved. That is just different from this game, where this game, again, it focuses on foreign aid. It uses victory points as a lever to control the foreign intervention, to control the foreign aid, and ultimately to somehow influence your on map operational tempo. And when I read the rules for the Korean War, it was like sinking into a well-worn in couch, right? That you're used to laying in or sitting in or whatever, where you're like, hey, yeah, this is familiar. This makes a lot of sense to me. And when I look at this system, even if I'm trying to figure it out, it is the reminder that this whole system, this whole game, really, the OSS system that we're seeing here, at least in this iteration of it, is its really own system. It's doing a lot of things that other games don't do, for better or for worse, right? And I realize I'm like going 14 minutes into the video on this. What I keep in mind is that this game, I think Adam likes it a lot, and he considers it well regarded for the system, as he just likes this particular product. I won't put words in his mouth, but he's said something to that effect, I think, in the past on Consum World or something. Um, that this game system has gone through other iterations, right? Vietnam, Rumor of War, which was the next game. You have the hypothetical Third World War situation that is covered in the Battle for Germany game or whatever that just came out, where some of these oddball things just maybe aren't as relevant and have been refined in those future games, which just kind of makes it, you just have to look back at this game and say, well, whatever weirdness might be here might not be in those other games, or it might be treated differently to the degree that it just, those games are worthwhile in a vacuum on their own for their own purposes, while this game, basically has competition competing for war gamers dollars and time to say, well, are you going to play the Korean War, or are you going to play this? And I feel like the cards are obviously stacked against this game because of the initial launch of this game kind of being rough in terms of people's desire for errata and fixing things up. Knowing that, as I'm playing a version that has gotten rules revisions and improvements and it got cleaned up, and that maybe it's too late to have a good impact to turn this game around for people. But at the same time, it's now competing with a game that is much more well regarded, and folks are more familiar with, and I don't know. It's just a weird consideration. I don't like the idea that a game is the final word on a subject. Like, okay, that's it. That game came out. It was really good, and that's it. No one can do another game for that war or that topic justice better than this game, right? That's a very final consideration, right? It's a terminating endpoint, right? That's it. That we got as far as we could ever get. We're done. So you want to have the chance that a newer game can make that improvement, and that's just the big challenge, right? Okay. Anyway, enough of this intro, right? I'm sure someone is going to comment, quit yapping, get gaming. Sorry, guys. I don't know. I had to talk about it. A lot of stuff on my mind. I haven't had a chance to record in a while. Okay, so where are we at? We are on turn 20. We are on the second half of January 1951. It is still a winter turn, and it is still clear weather. We are looking at kind of we're in the last sort of phase of the game. We've seen the North Koreans push down into South Korea. We've seen the UN and South Korean forces push the North Koreans back over the border. We were making progress in North Korea, and sort of via my own bad play for both sides, mind you, the North Koreans didn't get as far as maybe they could have or should have in invading the South. And likewise, the UN, due to bad interpretation of the situation on my part, didn't get very far into North Korea maybe as they should have. They halted, and they probably should not have done that. They should have tried to do everything they could to knock down the escaping North Koreans. The Chinese have intervened, and they have come across the border, and they have come down, and as of last video, they made several good cracks at the UN line, achieving something of a breakthrough here that we're still waiting to see, what really develops out of that. And creating a very tough situation over here where just enough of a breakout or breakthrough was occurring that some of the UN forces way over here are a little bit outside the UN capability to project supply and communications, and they are in some trouble. The other issue that the UN side of my brain are dealing with is that their HQs are flipped due to the surprise. We're not going to get them back until the start of the next month, so after this turn. But the majority of our UN combat units are flipped to their fresh side, so they will at least not be as weak as they were. The problem will be we can't activate them, essentially. We need the HQs to flip, to be unflipped, so that we can... this poor guy, what's this guy doing? Bug out marker. I guess I don't need that bug out marker right now. The challenge here is we can't activate units. We can't even really move units. The only thing we could really do is do strategic movement, and that requires being a certain distance from our opponents. So really, this is still going to be a turn where the communist player still has a lot more free reign to try to capitalize on the Chinese intervention. So it's not as bad as the last turn, but they still have a tremendous advantage. And we could see potentially some very large encirclement type actions here that will eliminate units and could potentially be so bad as to make it an untenable situation for the UN player, in which case the whole game could shift. As it stands right now for the victory points, you can see sort of over here, the UN player has 15 victory points, which is quite good. If they get 6 more victory points, they would win an automatic victory at an end of turn check. Now they're sitting quite well with a number of objective markers in Seoul that they're picking off. That will probably get them close to 21, but not the full way. But the other thing that will probably start to occur is that the UN player will lose victory points due to combats. And eventually, if the communist player can at least get Pyongyang back, they have a nice stack of objective markers here that they can start picking off as well. Now, there's the whole gamey objective placement stuff that I have been doing. This is not gamey. The UN took Pyongyang. There was really no way to avoid taking it without major railway connection problems, so they just took it. It is only one hex of Pyongyang. So the communist player could put those objective markers kind of elsewhere, but is sort of making a bet that he can just dunk them all in Pyongyang and he'll be able to get that back and then start reaping the benefits. That will probably pull the VP marker, if they can do this and do it well and last long enough, start to pull that victory point marker back towards 0, but will be offset by the UN player picking off their victory points. So it could be on the map, the military situation is very bad for the UN, but due to the victory point accrual stuff that's been going on, they could still maybe edge out a victory. And if we get to that point and we say, oh, well, the UN player won, but the military situation is awful for them, that might put a really hard dissonance on the game ending, and maybe that'll influence how I feel about the game too. I don't know. We're going to find out. Okay, so in terms of this turn, which is week 3 and 4 of the January 1951 month, I've already done everything up to the communist strategic movement. And so what I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to do their strategic movement. I'm going to do their activity phase, and we'll come back and we'll see what the situation is like from there, and then we'll keep rolling from there. We'll probably try to fit a couple of turns into this video if I can, just so we're off to a good start again on the process. If you stuck it through for 22 minutes of this intro, pat yourself on the back. You are a trooper, my friend, and I'm going to stop my rambling. See you guys in a second. Okay, so here we are after the communist activation phase and refresh. I spent out their supply, activating basically as many units as I could. I've sort of left a gap over here open, but that's largely because I know that the UN player really can't do anything about it. So we had the one guy that was routed before last turn due to some bad attacks that went goofy, and so that's fine. But what's really happened across the board is really bad news for the UN, and unfortunately, it's put me in this weird perspective in terms of losses that I'll talk about in a second. But over here, we had the group that was out of communication. Well, I focused attacks on sealing the path. So we eliminated a great number of units that were out of communication that could do nothing to resolve their losses except to be eliminated. I mean, we issued so many losses and loss factors, and we also had guards units involved a lot of the time that it cleared out a lot of those American units. There's still a few left over here. One is routed, one is actually was left untouched by the combats, but easy to see and to say that this swarm here has really cleaned up UN forces and is going to keep pushing out this way to kind of cause some communication problems for anybody who doesn't get moving south. Over here, we did clear some of the roads. That makes our own communication tracing with our HQs a little bit easier for next time. It's really tough to make sure that I was activating the right Chinese communist HQs over here to activate the units that I needed. They really need to push further south for the counting across the roads to link up. So I will say, all things considered, the junctions of where roads meet and how you can count for command is actually pretty important here. But ultimately, they were able to get what they needed to do. So they pushed through here. We eliminated several units over this way. We did cause some to retreat. So that sort of breakthrough helped us create additional holes in the UN force line to penetrate deeper. We'd love to cut some more guys out of supply. Um, I don't know what the UN player can do to stop what's happening. They need to pull back, and it's just because of the amount of turn that just exists in this space. It is really difficult for them to get to go. And what I think is really problematic for them is that for whatever units they can move south with strategic movement, it will probably not be enough to hold the true line, because when we get to the beginning of February 1951, the communist player gets to go again first, right? So they're just going to keep hammering. And what was critically important is, in many cases, I, as the communist player, created a state where that unit could not trace supply or line of communication to get artillery or tank support. And the Allies don't even have that much artillery support to begin with right now because they've lost a lot of it. Um, and the weather is so bad that the air doesn't help the UN a whole lot. It just created situations where, when we look at the loss factors that had to be taken into account, I, where I could retreat, I tried to, but in many cases, I lost many units. And that's going to be a big problem, because once you lose a unit on the board, it is hard to get them back on the board, and this will further drive problems for the UN player to hold a coherent line, and we could very well see a pretty dramatic push down south, which is, I think, part of the historical narrative, but this might be badder for the UN forces than was historical, and we'll just kind of see where that plays. Again, where we're eliminating units, we're even separating cadre, the cadre units from their subordinate units, which is going to cause problems. So really, truly, it's getting pretty messy for the UN right now, and we'll see what we can do to resolve that. Just to kind of show the losses, I'll just bring the camera over so you guys can see. The vast majority of what's in the losses box, obviously has occurred within the last couple of turns. We have the majority of entire divisions lost here. I mean, we have, so there's the orange banner units. We've got sort of this brown set. We lost the actual cadre for the purple division. And the vast majority of this sort of navy blue division. So, I mean, it is very bad. And here's the thing. I think in a couple of spots, when it comes to taking losses, I might have been able to say, okay, I'm going to lose maybe this one unit, or in a couple of spots, maybe I could have gotten away with losing victory points, but it's that decision that I don't really understand as well. Like, I get it. If you play the game enough, you could sort of sit down and say, okay, I don't want to lose a unit, so I will retreat. That retreating or routing will probably make that unit easier to kill anyway, but then you give up victory points. And I don't quite understand what the victory points really are meant to represent in that context, other than, yay, good job, you fought a good battle, so you get victory points, but the opponent gets to decide that. So I don't really know. It's just part of that weirdness there. But I, as the UN player, was not willing to give up victory points because we are so close. We want that buffer of victory points to hold on into the late game. But maybe that's a mistake, because it won't matter if I don't have units to hold the line. So there's this sort of decision space that I kind of understand. I'm not sure I really get the sort of simulation aspect of it, if there is any. But I can see where maybe I've made some mistakes in the last 5 minutes, just choosing to lose a unit wholesale than to lose a bunch of support and lose victory points that maybe I can save later. Because I expect I'm still going to get some reinforcements and replacements and all that kind of stuff to come. So I can get units back on the board okay, actually. But boy, there's some challenges. So I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think there. This could be a really rough situation for the UN player through the whole thing. So with the communist refresh phase done, we have the UN stuff. The UN activation just really can't happen, right? There really is no UN activations that can occur due to the HQs all being flipped. So it's a matter of strategic movement. What can the UN player do for strategic movement to try to salvage this situation? Now the UN player gets a little bit of an easier time doing strategic movement. Um, let's see, what is it? Pulling back really isn't a problem. If they start 2 hexes or more from a communist unit, so not everyone's going to actually be able to move. See, 2 or more. So these guys could pull back over here because they're 1, 2, 2 or more. So they could pull back from their prepared positions. This guy could pull back. This guy could pull back. Well, he's flipped, so he may not be able to. And then this cadre, this division here, the green division, the 25th Infantry could pull back, and some of these guys could pull back. And so that's probably what we're going to have to do, but it's like, where can they pull back to, right? There's really not much of a safe place to do that other than to try to create a line on the narrowest band of land possible, which would be like right here. So I'm gonna try to do that strategic movement and just see what we can maybe get. But the thing is, if we pull back over here, these guys are just going to be SOL. They might be SOL anyway. So maybe we just have to sacrifice them. I don't know. There's not a good answer here, to be honest. It's really not a good answer to resolve the problem we're facing at all. So we'll see. Okay, so here we are after the UN strategic movement. You can see we sort of created a line, leaving some guys behind just to be disruptive, but that's kind of a doomsday scenario we're facing right now. And as we get to the end of the turn itself, we will, let's see, what else can be done? So this is what we'll probably end up doing. We will pull a victory. We'll pull some victory points off as the UN player and get them up to 18, and the communist player will plop a objective marker in Pyongyang again. Starting to run out of objective points, I guess. That would be an incentive to put some objectives near to the front line so that we don't run out, because if we run out and we can't take any actions, then we lose a victory point, which would give the UN player a victory point. But I think we're okay for the moment. We're fine to keep stockpiling in Pyongyang. The UN player pulling off a revealed victory point they had for a bonus. So they're actually up to 18 victory points, just so we're clear. We're up to 18. If they can pull off 1, 2, 3 more victory points, they might actually win. They might actually win via that way, which would be a little weird, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Okay, guys. Let me figure out. I'm not sure how long this video is. Let me go ahead and get through the monthly phase stuff for February 1951, and we'll go from there. Okay, so why am I showing the communist air display right now? And why does it look so strange? Um, well, I started to do the February 1951 monthly phase, and a couple of interesting things happened. Unlikely things happened, in fact. Um, and it is going to have a pretty dramatic effect on the game, which is good from an interesting standpoint, right? Like the more crazy stuff that happens in the game, that makes for an interesting game, gameplay video, I guess. Um, but it puts a twist on a already kind of twisty game as we've played. I rolled the weather, and it is in fact snowy on this winter turn. So this is the last winter turn that is possible, there was a 10% chance that it would be snowy, and we really haven't had a snowy turn yet. We just had regular winter with clear weather. Well, I rolled a 1, and that meant that it is in fact snowy. The primary effect of that on the air situation is that there's going to be no flying of air this month, this turn. This is a month that comprises of just one turn, weeks 1 through 4. So the UN player will not have any planes in the sky this turn, and neither will the communists, but they have a whole bunch more planes right now than they did before. Why is that? Well, if you're paying attention, and if you can tell, I don't know how it's showing up on the camera, a slight change in the color tone of some of these units. It's a little hard to tell, probably because it's all shades of the same basic, warm color. The Soviets have intervened. So when it came to the foreign intervention die roll for the monthly turn, we basically had a 1 in 6 chance of the Soviets intervening. We needed to roll a 1, with the modifier being, a -1, because the UN player has 15 or more victory points. They're sitting at 18 at the moment. So I rolled the die, I rolled a 1, so 1 minus 1 is 0. That triggers Soviet intervention. Now, the Soviets add 4 units to the to a communist supply source. So we put them on the board. You just actually see them right on camera right here for 4 units. So not that the communists are hurting for units, but hey, more the merrier. That will be helpful for them to take some actions. We'll see how that goes. I might have to double check how they're activated. I assume Chinese HQs will be able to activate them. That's really the important thing here. But what they really brought was a pretty big helping of air units. What's interesting is when you look at the reinforcement schedule, it includes not just Soviet aircraft units, which are sort of these more brown colors, but there are some additional PRC, People's Republic of China Air Force units that come in only when the Soviets intervene. So I think when I had organized my counters before, I had set them up where all the Soviets were in one bag, all the Chinese were in one bag. I should probably change how I sort that and put some of these Chinese units that only show up during Soviet intervention in the bag with the Soviets, right? That's something to point out there. So you can see there is a whole lot of Soviet aircraft now. Now, because of the snowy weather, they won't get to use it. But now the UN player is going to have to keep that in mind. They no longer have uncontested control of the skies. And what's really important about that is that this can sort of be seen, obviously, as a quite ahistorical situation. I don't believe how the Soviets were involved were in a relatively minor degree. They did not intervene to this scale, is my understanding. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Not to the level that all of this is illustrating here. So this is in effect creating an air war that could have been, and I know that the OCS Korea game has a special rule for an optional rule to let you do this so that there's more air fighting. Well, here we're actually going to have the potential for some pretty big air combats, and the actual air system this late in the game, we still have many turns to go, I guess, in the big scheme of things. But this actually puts an interesting twist because really the UN player was going to just continue to have control of the skies, and that was just going to be it, right? Here we actually have the potential for the Soviets to gain some ground, and potentially it is conceivable that they could beat the UN air back and cause a lot of problems for the UN player in general. Now, the thing about that is, if we, for instance, send a bunch of fighters into Mig Alley, it is entirely possible that the UN player could lose victory points because the communists win in Mig Alley, and that would put them out of their shot right now to win an automatic victory. And so there's almost an incentive right now for the UN player to maybe not even put guys out in Mig Alley and just say, so be it. We're going to give up on the strategic, air segment, and not give you that, opportunity to get victory points. And I'm like, I need to double check. Do you have to get the victory points for winning a combat, not just having uh, let me just double check here. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, there has to be air-to-air combat for that victory point to matter. So the UN could actually circumvent that by not putting anything in Mig Alley. They can put stuff in top cover. They can continue to have air superiority at a tactical degree, but they can basically give up on strategic bombing missions and not have Mig Alley and not have that victory point issue hit them. And so this kind of creates an interesting honestly, for me, there's a kind of a weird dissonance right now. Um, so if we look at the board position as is, you can kind of think of this like the current victory point situation. It took a while for all of the good work of the UN to actually reflect on the victory point chart because they did well. They put a bunch of objective markers. It has taken them many turns to actually get the victory points for all of that great progress, right? That's one way to look at it. Um, so they're leading in victory points, but their actual operational situation right now is looking fairly dire. But if they can hold out the clock for a few turns and just figure out a way to avoid having the communist player get victory points, then they're fine. They're actually golden. They have enough victory points on the board to win. Now, what does this mean from a victory standpoint, or what does this represent? Game to history. Well, I don't know. If the UN players winning with their line collapsing, with their units being torn apart, what does that really mean, right? You could say there's enough, global concern that a threat of nuclear war might stop the situation, and the allies, the UN player, maybe if they have managed to keep control of Pyongyang, are in a better bargaining position at the time that some peace talks break out. That's like how I would attempt to interpret this, because otherwise there's a very large dissonance between, hey, here's the board position, and then here's what the victory points look like. And I think only so much of that, victory point discrepancy can be explained by my gamey, weird, victory point bank in Seoul, right? I mean, I think even if I wasn't doing that, the UN would have probably been able to pick up a lot of victory points, and they'd still be on the back foot, and they'd still, be in this weird position where they're winning by victory points, they're losing operationally on the board. Um, and maybe there's just some nuance there. Like I can appreciate the nuance and the difference of winning the larger context of the conflict and be losing on the front lines because it's all situational and circumstantial to what the position of the war has been up to this point, right? There's, I don't want to be overly forgiving for the design, but I can understand like if that's how the game is situated, I can understand why um, you can have this situation come up. Um, okay, so I know I'm taking a long time. I'm taking a long time to do this. Here's the easy thing from here on out. The infrastructure and supply phase I will do. I'll take care of that off camera. Because it's a snowy turn, the cost for the UN player is doubled. Not just, oh, it's increased. It is doubled, which means that they're going to have a hard time refreshing HQs and getting all of that set up. The aircraft recovery and reinforcement phase will be largely uneventful. I think the UN is actually going to withdraw and lose a unit or two, but they're likely going to repair some of their bigger bomber planes. And then we would have air commitment phase, but again, because it's a snowy turn, there is no air commitment. And so it really is just going to get us right back to the start of the turn, and we'll see kind of how things play out for their for the communist strategic movement and activation phase. Okay, very quickly, before I get into the communist action with their strategic movement and combats, I want to show a couple of things very quickly. There are a number of reinforcements that were coming this turn for the communist player. A really high amount, actually, a surprising amount. So not only do we have the Soviets, we have a number three Chinese combat units in another HQ, and then down here we have four North Korean units and an HQ. Now, the funny thing about the North Korean units is that they don't have any replacement points left. So I don't really know what these guys do, except maybe garrison areas or something. But hey, more the merrier, right? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's not just when the Chinese intervene, there's a whole bunch of units coming over the border. There's still more coming that aren't even on the board yet. And in fact, there's still some more that will come in as reinforcements. So um, the communist player is still getting more and more units on the board. Their advantage, for sure, is in numbers. And they need to try to maintain that advantage. Right now, without any air support, ordinarily this would be still really good for the communists, right? They'd keep cracking the line with their superior numbers, and that's really, where they would get a lot of their bonuses from. When the weather clears, I suspect a normal game would have the communist player with their quantity fighting against the quality of the UN forces because the UN would have an advantage on armor and um, armor and air, typically, right? And in fact, the air would be overwhelming advantage. And so you would probably end up with the ability to kind of go back and forth because both sides would have pretty good bonuses. I think what this game is currently putting into the cards is that the communist player is going to have their quantity, and the quality measurement won't be so different because as the communist player, I've done a pretty good job keeping the North Korean tank force in existence, and they've gotten some bonuses from foreign aid. And with the Soviet air coming in, that actually could potentially make it so that the UN air advantage that they've had for the entire game is mitigated. In fact, mitigated quite a bit depending on how those die rolls go. So it's such a weird situation. Like we can feel the overwhelming power of the communist reinforcements coming in, but that they might not matter at all when it comes to the actual board position because of the victory point situation. And I definitely think with things so close, like I think the UN player, I was questioning it before, but I think, yeah, sure. I mean, take a whole unit loss if it means that the Allies get to continue to pick their victory points out of Seoul. Now, this is where the game would be different if we were playing with my suggested variant rules, which I have not published yet. I will wait until I'm done with my playthrough to do that. Where we wouldn't necessarily get to just, enjoy the plethora of victory points in Seoul. We would have had to have put those objective markers, in some logically placed, spots on the map, which would be harder for them to just get the victory points for because the communists would be pushing back and making it harder to actually claim the victory points. So if we were playing with my sort of suggested variant, the Allied victory point marker might not be so high. And in fact, it might be more around maybe the 10 number or something instead of 18. In which case, the game would probably feel a little bit different. It would feel a little tighter than it feels right now, where it feels weirdly lopsided that the UN's about to win the game and they're falling apart, comparatively speaking on the board. So I don't know, stuff to think about as we get towards the end of the game, because what we could see end up happening is that the game ends within the next few turns rather than going the distance because of that. And that's something, I don't know, to keep in mind and think about. Okay. The Allies also spent a number of replacement points rebuilding units. They have many over here. I'm trying to keep cadre consistency So I'm bringing units back. That has forced me to put some of the dead US units into the destroyed pile, where they will probably remain for the rest of the game, but it will allow me to get some of these units back. You, remember, if you have two units of the same nationality in the replacements box, you pay a replacement point. One of those units goes to destroy, the other one comes onto the board. So you could pick units in the replacement box for the US that are from different cadre sets, different divisions, um, as long as they're US. So if it makes sense to bring back two purple banner cadre units, and lose a couple other ones because you want to have some consistency of the cadre group, that might be worth it. So just a small note there. So the U.S. is bringing back a number of units, six total, five U.S., one South Korean unit, which will make up for some of the losses in the last turn, but um, probably not all of them. And actually, come to think of it, I think we're going to. I can do one more. It's kind of a tough call to figure out which one that's going to be. Um, Maybe I'll hold off for now. The problem is some of these units that I would bring back, their actual cadre head unit are about to get smushed. So it's like, do you bring those guys back or not? Or what? Like, what do you do? Do you wait? And I might just wait and figure out, what to do from there. Um, Okay, so the communists will go. You will likely see, obviously guys are going to be moving forward. They're going to try to eliminate this and get to this new front line. And the UN, by comparison, will be trying to get guys moved up there. The UN has a real big problem because it's going to be extremely expensive for them to flip HQs this turn. And so their ability to do like reserve movement to respond to communist movement, I mean, it's just not good. There's not going to be much they can do. So a lot of these guys up here are just screwed. These guys that are sort of being a nuisance, that's the best they can do. Okay, so here we are after the communist actions, and yeah, it was another bloodbath. I mean, there's just no way to get around it. I was trying to think through, like, okay, is there did I been playing something wrong this whole game just in case? Like, is there anything I'm missing? Because there is always when we do the communications check and a unit fails to have a line of communication, you put an OOC marker on it. But when I've been doing these combat rounds, if I can move units to such a degree that they can get surrounding a unit, the way the rules are written, you have to then trace a line of communication to use artillery or tank support. But if your opponent has, in their movement, surrounded you with Zocs and units or whatever, you can't trace those lines of communication. So you don't have an OOC marker, but at the time that you need to call support and trace, you are unable to do that, right? You fail to do that. So based on the way the rules are written, I believe I've been playing that correctly. But I do just wonder, as I'm picking off, single units and annihilating them. I mean, I almost don't even need to roll the dice. It's like, okay, communists have like plus 20 because they have, all these supports and their artillery and their tank and everything else all together, and that is um, sufficient enough to get like a plus 20. And then if you're isolated, you can't get support. There's no air for the UN right now. So they basically get a terrain modifier. You're going to get the max combat loss every time you roll the dice, right? Just about. I mean, you could roll a 1 and a 10. You could roll a 10, the opponent could roll a 1, they'd still beat you. And even if you have elite or poor units or whatever, it still doesn't change the fact that you're just getting annihilated. So it's just kind of interesting as I play through, where it's like, well, yeah, as long as I'm just playing relatively intelligently, um, I can almost guarantee a unit will be destroyed, or maybe even routed, and then in a routed state, that unit isn't long for this world. But as it relates to the actual game position, we've cleared the roadblocks. we are about adjacent to the new front line for the UN forces, what they've managed to cobble together in terms of a defense. And probably next turn, when the sky's clear, is going to be a pretty interesting turn. Mostly because I still have a UN action here. I'm not sure there's much that they can do, honestly. Um, but the situation right now just kind of feels like they need to they need to try to maintain a coherent line across the board. That way they can at least support each other in an attack. So they can at least get a base, +4 or something for defense plus terrain, and they'll all be in line of communication, which will mean that the allied artillery and tank support will be there, the air will be there next turn. This line could actually hold. We just have to make sure that we try to plug as many of the holes in the line as possible. Not an easy feat, necessarily speaking. Not a whole lot we can do, but we can try. The other thing will be, next turn we'll open up the air war, where because of the Soviet intervention, there will be a big air battle. So next turn actually will prove to be very interesting because it's going to be, the final phases of the game functionally for us, where, that air combat's going to decide a lot, I think, in terms of what's available and what's going to happen from there on out. I think that the ground combats will matter a lot. Like if this is the final redoubt, uh, the final bastion for the UN, if that line cracks, and it's quite possible that it will, Pyongyang is nearby, and that is the key to the communists trying to stave off the UN winning via victory points. So who knows what, right? That's really what's going to be the tricky bit. If they can get to Pyongyang, if they can liberate Pyongyang, that's really what they need to do. And you can see the whole weight of all these units kind of coming through. The only area we didn't quite get to was cutting off this middle part. But within the next, communist move, we will be able to project units across this front line the whole way. We will have, probably for the first time in the whole game, a front line that is from one coast to the other coast, lined with units from both sides in some position, across the board, which will make things interesting from that perspective, because we just haven't had that situation come up as much. But the UN player still gets to do their movement and activations. Again, all their activations are largely going to be around creating a coherent line. So let me take care of that very quickly. Okay, here we are after all of the UN movement. So they've strat moved what they could. They've activated and moved units. They pulled back HQs after those activations. Basically, just trying to get something, and they've managed to plug some of the holes in the line due to movement restrictions and distance because of the weather and everything else. I couldn't quite get a really nice even line, and so there's a little bit of goofiness there that I think the communists could exploit. Um, they're certainly going to have the ability to get some 3-to-1 attacks, 3 units to 1 unit attacks and whatnot. So we'll see. Some of those will probably be hasty attacks, maybe in the best situations, prepared attacks over here. There will be deliberate attacks, but at least those potential breakthroughs are not going to be right next to Pyongyang. That's really the deciding factor here. So at the end of the turn, as we look at the victory point stuff, the UN player picks off a single victory point claimed in Seoul. That brings them up to 19 victory points. We need 2 more to win the game, I believe. As I look at, make sure I see this here, if there's any other notes. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we are basically at 19 victory points for the UN player, 2 away from victory, right? I mean, it kind of puts the communist player in a position where they can't afford to ever take victory point losses if they lose any combats. It's all going to come off of units and or replacements. and retreating, whereas, basically the UN player will never give up a victory point in combat either. Um, and so it's all going to be about replacements and retreating as well, with the hope of keeping them out of Pyongyang. I think what's going to happen is that for the communists right now, they need to take Pyongyang. They need to spend one turn, I guess, within a turn or two, taking Pyongyang, claiming or flipping, revealing all of these victory points here, and then uh, pulling the victory points off. And as soon as they can start doing that, and hopefully, any of these, I mean, we could just look right now, right? It almost doesn't matter if I cheat. Let's just cheat right now. 3 victory points. 1, 1, 5, 6. Okay, so if I add all these up, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 16, 19. There's 19 victory points worth of markers in Pyongyang. Here's the problem, and I hope that you guys understand where I'm going with this if you've been tracking the game so far. In some ways, I almost want to call the game right now. Let's figure out the map. We're going to need a turn. If we can't get to Pyongyang this turn, that's a problem. But let's say we take Pyongyang next turn as the communist player. We have to take, say we get super lucky somehow, and next turn we take Pyongyang because of an advance after combat. We can sail down the line or something. That would mean we could reveal those objective markers this turn. At the end of next turn, I mean, we're really talking about March 1951. At that point, the UN player has 20 victory points, and then we start pulling them off the next turn. So at the end of the next turn after that, the UN player would, let's see, they would add, the UN player would pull off their last marker, bringing them to 21. But if the communist player has taken Pyongyang at that point, they would pull off one of their 5s, and that would bring it back down to a 16. And then every turn after that, as long as we have Pyongyang, the UN player is basically out of objective markers. And so then the next turn we would take off another 5. That would bring it down to 11. And then over the course of several more turns, we'd be trying to drive that victory point marker past 0 into the red zone for communist victory. What I'm wondering is, will we have enough turns to do that, right? So let's just, again, I'm like cheating looking at these, but just so that we're clear, if we just set these in the order that I would want to do this in, objectively, right? Let's say we're fortunate enough, this next turn we capture Pyongyang and reveal all these markers. Then what? So we would do 5 that turn, 5 that turn, 3, 1, 1. I guess it would be 3 for this one as well. So if we can take Pyongyang in March, and then each turn be peeling off these victory points, we will end up going into June, the end of June, with the victory point track at positive UN, maybe like 1. And then if we can get down, so that would mean we would lose unless within the next 5 turns we could take Seoul. So what does that functionally mean for us in a game perspective kind of thing, right? And just to mark this, All those guys are Pyongyang. I'm just going to use one shit so we see our timetable and I can adjust as necessary. I wouldn't do this in a face-to-face game. I'm just playing myself, so I know what's going on. If we fail to take Pyongyang the next turn, we will lose the game because the UN player will pick off the rest of their victory points. They'll be at 21 within the next turn or so. That's the timeline we have to beat. We have to take Pyongyang this next coming turn as the communists. If we fail, if we manage to take it, then it could be anybody's game, because what it would mean is the communists continue to move south with all of the Pyongyang victory points. That would bring them close to being into the red, meaning they would be the winner at the end of the turn. They would then have several turns to try to retake Seoul. If they are able to take Seoul or any of these other areas that have objective markers in them over here or over near Incheon, that would probably be enough to bring them over the edge. So that's where we're at in terms of timing. I figured it out with, wow, you're watching on camera, you poor folks listening to my rambling. Figuring out the mathematically, if we fail to take Pyongyang by early spring, by the end of March 1951, the communists will lose the game. That's the situation. They must reclaim, if you want to put this in any other game simulation context, if they cannot retake their capital, North Korean capital, by the end of spring, the UN wins, the United Nations player wins. Interpret that any which way you want. They've delayed the communist counteroffensive long enough to procure a peace that is beneficial to the Western powers, the United Nations and South Korea. If they manage to take Pyongyang, then the war still has some dice in it because we need to determine where things land at the very, very end, and the UN player will have to make some decisions pending that. So both sides understand the importance of Pyongyang. Both are going to be playing to this situation. If we get to the end of next turn, which will be the next video, because this video is probably super long at this point, I'm sorry. Next video could be the last video in the series. If we fail to take Pyongyang, that's game, set, and match. I could play through it very quickly and resolve the turn actions, but that would be it. If we manage to take Pyongyang, then the series would continue and the decision making would continue. I'll say as I close out this video, this is intended to be the conclusion for this particular video. I can see where at this point in the game, you can start to feel out where the objective markers and the VP subsystem adds tension to the game. It has taken me a really long time to get to this point, and I still believe that my tweaks to the victory point objective marker placement rules are needed to make this flow better and to cover the gaminess that we've seen with Seoul. That's kind of where I'm walking away from it so far, but we'll see how it goes. If you've stuck through this whole video, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sure some of you folks have been waiting for this video for a while because I've been so absent. Again, I apologize for that. But this video is filled with all sorts of Steve thoughts for you to consider until I record more, which will hopefully be soon. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the comments and all the good stuff there. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Hit like if you like the video, subscribe if somehow you're watching this and you're not already subscribed. I have to imagine that you are if you're watching turn 20 of this series. But yeah, we'll see you in the next one, guys. Take care. Keep gaming.